For Black History Month, I would like to spotlight the accomplishments of Dorothy Butler Gilliam, a pioneer in Black journalism. She was the first Black woman journalist on the Washinton Post. I first heard of Dorothy when she was featured on The Daily Show with Trevor Noah to promote her new book, Trailblazer, a pioneering journalist's fight to make the media look more like America. Let's have a chat. Dorothy Butler Gilliam was hired by the Washinton Post in 1961 as a new young daily news reporter. She had a master's degree in journalism from Columbia University. Being assigned to daily news alone was an accomplishment. First, most female reporters were hired to work on the women's pages. They were to cover recipes, fashion, social stories, advice columns, things that were considered women's news. Women reporting on regular news stories were still rare. Second, she was expected to cover Black news. The civil rights movement was going on, and there was much news about racial issues. Washington, D.C. was then, and is today, predominantly Black. Most of the white people who work there don't live there. Dorothy's editors saw her role as being a Black reporter who could talk to Black people in D.C., people who would not open up to a white reporter. She could cover stories from the Black communities and stories about racial issues. But Dorothy saw so much more potential for herself. She worked to convince her editors that all news aspects affect Black people as well as white people. There isn't Black news and white news, there's just news. But there are different perspectives on the news. She convinced her editors to let her cover regular news stories from a Black perspective, to let the Post readers see how daily events impact the lives of Black people differently than they do those of white people. One of Dorothy's greatest struggles in her early days as a journalist was transportation. In the days before internet journalism, meeting the time deadline for a story was crucial. Reporters had to have their stories into the editor by the deadline so that the editor could then edit it, choose which stories would go in that day's paper, write the headlines, and arrange the layout of the paper. The layout would then go to the press room where each letter was individually placed into a tray to form the page of the paper. And once the entire paper was laid out, the paper could then be printed and then sent to distribution. So to get a story in the current day's paper, it had to be finished and on the editor's desk several hours before the paper went to print. Without today's electronics, reporters took notes while they were in the field, and once their notes were complete, they needed to get back to the newsroom quickly to type them up into a story and get the story on the editor's desk. Because of the time constraints, taxicabs were the fastest way to travel around the city. Few people brought their own vehicles to D.C. Even today, this isn't done as there is insufficient parking. One of Dorothy's biggest problems as a young Black journalist was getting a taxicab to stop for her. Her white colleagues had no problem with this and didn't really understand that this was an issue. But the taxi companies at that time only hired white drivers, and most of the taxi drivers would not stop for her. Dorothy was born in Memphis, Tennessee during the time of segregation and Jim Crow laws. When she moved to D.C., she was surprised to discover that D.C. was almost as segregated as Memphis and Louisville, where she moved at age 5. She found she was as unwelcome in the white areas of D.C. as she was in the white neighborhoods of Tennessee. Dorothy's first reporting position was with the Tri-State Defender, a Black newspaper, where in 1957 she covered the story of the desegregation of Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. She saw her boss savagely beaten by a white mob that mistook him for the parent of one of the children escorted to school by federal troops. This event had a lasting impression on Dorothy, illustrating the level of hatred that some white people have for Black people, and how misunderstanding can lead to violence. This incident also contributed to Dorothy's lifelong struggle with depression. In 1961, Dorothy had the honor of covering part of the biggest story of the time, following up on one of the greatest constitutional crises our country faced, the admission to the University of Mississippi of James Meredith. James Meredith is an Air Force veteran who, after completing 9 years of service, attended 2 years at Jackson State College. He decided to finish his college degree at the University of Mississippi, a carefully planned move to integrate the flagship University of Mississippi. He won his Supreme Court case against the university and sought admission. After overcoming numerous roadblocks and delays, Meredith was escorted to enroll at the university by federal marshals and others. The university appointed the governor as temporary registrar, who personally denied Meredith admission, saying the federal government didn't have the authority to direct the state to admit a student. Governor Barnett was found to be in contempt of court, and President Kennedy worked out an agreement with him to back down. But 2,000 white people rioted on the campus, and the university again denied Meredith admission. Following several failed attempts to enroll, Meredith was secretly escorted to a dormitory on September 30th, 1962, from which he could enroll the following day. Word got out and riots ensued. 2 people were killed and 70 were wounded. 1/3 of Meredith's protection detail were wounded in the riots. President Kennedy went on national television calling for people to stand down and vowing that he would send in federal troops to enroll Meredith. The next day, Generals Billingsley and Corley arrived and Meredith was enrolled, but not until after the general's car was set on fire while they and aides were still inside. The angry mob stirred up by the KKK was still intent on keeping Ole Miss segregated. Hours after Meredith enrolled, then young reporter Dorothy Gilliam was assigned by her editor to go to Mississippi to cover the reaction to the events in the black community. When Meredith attended his first day of class at the University of Mississippi, he was escorted by 30,000 federal troops. When I heard Dorothy talk about this on The Daily Show, I was shocked. This happened in my lifetime, although I was a toddler at the time. I had certainly heard about these events, but never that the riots were this big. It was this that prompted me to buy a copy of Dorothy's book, to learn more about what happened from someone who was actually there. Dorothy faced hurdles of her own in covering this story. She had to sleep at a black-owned funeral parlor, as none of the hotels in Oxford, Mississippi would allow her a room. Even though she was with the press, she was still black. She also had problems with such simple tasks as eating and using the restroom, as these were also still segregated by Jim Crow laws. There was also a press area that was set up, and it was segregated. White reporters had tables and chairs under a tent with plenty of room. The black press was given a folding table. Dorothy was married to artist Sam Gilliam, an abstract artist who is known for his drape paintings. Dorothy went on to get her own column and to become an editor. She taught journalism and promoted scholarships to underserved students to encourage colored students to enter the field of journalism. Her goal of getting the media to look more like America sought to bring not only colored journalists into the profession, but also a perspective in the news that has different viewpoints that reflect the various people that make up America. I highly recommend Dorothy's book, Trailblazer, for further reading about this amazing woman. Recent racial tensions in current events show that we still have a long way to go to achieve racial equality. Government-sanctioned violence against black people is still tolerated through the use of excessive force by police in too many places. More voices from people of color being heard by all will help the black perspective to be better understood. So today I salute pioneer journalist Dorothy Butler Gilliam. Until next time, live your life.